May the words of my mouth and the collective hearts of those gathered be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and redeemer. When I was in high school, I remember I had a teacher by the name of Wilbur Klein. He was the department chair and my economics teacher. While he always wore a jacket and tie, he was a very laid back and easy person to engage, particularly around his area of expertise, basketball and the stock market. Most of what I recall was the year-long assignment of selecting a company, studying that company, tracking the daily activity, and writing about it, ultimately sharing whether or not the company's value increased or decreased over the course of the year. It was here that I would learn some of the basic terminology used in economics: supply and demand, checks and balances, commodities, assets, liabilities and net worth, depreciation, devaluation, and diversification. It was a new and different experience, so it was interesting when I think back on those days. However, I must admit, when I later made the connection that some of these economic terms would be used to characterize some people or particular groups of people as opposed to the possessions of the people, it was a bit disconcerting. In fact, it was deeply troubling to be reminded that there is a market value placed on any human being. While I understand that there are many of us interested in our financial portfolios and net worth, which is determined by subtracting liabilities from assets at a specific moment in time, if we have more assets than liabilities, we know we have a positive net worth. If our liabilities overwhelm our assets, our net worth is negative. Of course, I understand the importance of looking at this for the purpose of achieving sound financial fitness and attempting to secure one's future. I'm not referring to a portfolio made up of stocks, numbers, and dividends, but a spiritual or moral portfolio, perhaps made up of acts of service, compassion, perhaps the fruits of the Spirit outlined in Paul's epistle to the Galatians: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Complications are created by society when net assets, things, and possessions are used to define us and suggest one person or one group of people who have many things, sparkly things, and live in a particular place somehow have or hold greater value. This means we begin to see one group or a particular group who may only represent 1% of the population as inherently more important than others. Subsequently, they have access to better schools, better services, the best of doctors, lawyers, housing options, tax abatements, crafting, the art of the deal, and real estate consumption, the best dining access to better quality food and fresh food, and the list continues on. depending upon how famous or how recognizable a person may be, the list of complimentary perks is endless. Free luxury hotels, free dining. Okay, this is a bit rhetorical, but I need someone to help me understand why the very people who can afford to pay often receive the complimentary seats, the tickets, the meals, and accommodations. When I was in college, I had a good friend who was a basketball player, about 6'7", 6'8", and some people seemed to think he resembled the NBA player. So we went out to a restaurant on City Island, and apparently the manager thought he was this basketball player from the NBA. So excited, he took photos and insisted that the meal be on the house. Of course, I was delighted for my friend because a complimentary meal as a college student could be considered a wonderful thing. But the truth is, when we as a society develop and cultivate this culture of valuing a group of people for what they have, more importantly, devaluing, marginalizing, neglecting individuals and groups because they do not have, leads to a disproportionate distribution of care, of services, of treatment, and of resources. It determines where they live, where they don't live or can't live, whether they can remain in this country to have their dreams fully realized or suffer the separation from their children due to deportation. I am, however, relieved to see the government has set aside, prior to last night, $45 billion for the next 9 years to address the opioid crisis. And addiction seems to be receiving greater attention. However, it wasn't long ago when K2 was the cheap drug of choice for thousands of people living on the streets. The focus was on creating an awareness around violent tendencies and behaviors and how to lock them up instead of proper treatment. There was little, if any, talk about money to address what many are finally acknowledging as a disease. Why is this? Is it because some lives don't matter in the sight of some decision makers, some leaders, some small percentage of people wielding a great deal of power? Today's gospel text, beginning in the 16th verse and taken from the Message Bible, reads, "Passing along the beach of Lake Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew net fishing. Fishing was their regular work. Jesus said to them, 'Come with me. I'll make a new kind of fisherman out of you. I'll show you how to catch men and women instead of perch and bass.' They didn't ask questions. They dropped their nets and followed." The brevity and the absence of details in Mark's gospel does have a natural tendency to ignite the imagination. And I seem to find and focus on these nets that were clearly so essential to these fishermen. This text is the beginning of Jesus' ministry as he calls his first disciples. In today's story, Jesus, walking along the beach of Galilee, calls 4 fishermen in the midst of their work to come and follow him. We don't know what there was about Jesus that led Simon, Andrew, John, and James to leave their homes and families and to follow him. Did they know Jesus already? Or was this their first contact with him? Whatever it was, there had to be something remarkably compelling about Jesus to cause these and others, to follow him into an uncertain future. One amazing piece of the story is that they followed Jesus with no idea of where it would lead. God's call is always into an uncertain future. When we enter into our callings, we have no idea where we are going to end up. We choose our careers, we choose our jobs, hoping that we can use the God-given gifts and talents, but there are no guarantees. We meet the first 4 disciples as they are engaged in their work when Jesus calls them to another type of fishing. This type of fishing is interpreted as another kind of catching, gathering, and harvesting of people, garnering supporters or followers of a movement for the purpose of mission. So one type of employment or a career, fishing, will be transformed yet into another for the purpose of sharing the good news and offering another kind of provision. Simon and Andrew respond in an instant without further conversation. They leave their nets, a sign of their former work and an essential element and asset for their profession. Likewise, James and John leave their nets, their father, and their employees to follow Jesus. While we know little else about the background, when the fishermen respond to Jesus by leaving their things, their valuables, their nets, the very things which play an essential role in developing and establishing their financial worth and following, they're joining a movement. They have a mission. They have a mission and a purpose that has greater value, a value that transcends time and space, value that pays dividends even to future generations. Mark's gospel will demonstrate the work of casting out demons, healing, and feeding the multitudes. It will remind you that the fishermen and the other 8 disciples were not the only disciples. They were not the only followers. And so while we still have portions of our society that would seek to dismiss the value, the worth, the contributions, and the indomitable spirit of women, we know that there are accounts, including Mark's gospel, which reveal to us that the women at the cross were among those who followed Jesus and provided for him. Women of faith, like the woman suffering from a hemorrhaging condition, or the Syrophoenician's daughter for whom Jesus performed a miracle. These followers, these women of faith, bear witness to the ministry, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus, and they become a channel for a tradition of faith, like Lois, the grandmother of Timothy. They become the shoulders upon which Jarena Lee, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Dorothy Day, Ella Mitchell, women who were pioneers in faith, disciples, change agents. They followed, they cared, and they shared, leaving a legacy and an inheritance of faith more valuable than the assets sitting in your Citibank account or a 401k. They are the women whose strength and faith passed along to a generation of brave women and girls who refuse to accept aggressive, abusive, and repulsive power plays that objectify, minimize, and subjugate their lives. These are the #MeToo and #TimesUp followers who will continue to empower future generations of girls and countless victims of power mongers, because they understand that if we strive to become a fully healthy body, a healthy society, we care for all its parts, the hurting parts, the neglected parts, the unpleasant parts, and not just the parts that we like. We're on this journey together, and everyone has value. Everyone can be an asset, each of us a precious commodity in the sight of God. Value and worth are not derived by things and possessions. A society that ultimately places monetary value on the lives of people and determines a person's worth based upon material possessions contributes to feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, and ultimately devalues lives rather than enhancing them. Discipleship is how we increase our value and true net worth. The good news is that whatever your vocation, you have been called as a disciple, called to follow Jesus, and regardless of the particularity of your vocational calling, we are all called to care for the body of Christ in all its diversified parts. We are called to care for each part. We have an opportunity as members of this body to follow Jesus in visiting the sick, the imprisoned, the lonely, and the despised and rejected. Jesus calls from the beach shore of Lake Galilee and issues an invitation to follow him. This is an invitation to us all and determines ultimately our true net worth. We have greater assets than we may readily identify, and this includes each and every one of us who has been invited to Christian discipleship, regardless of age, gender, race, sexual identity, orientation, or ambiguity. If you have walked into this sanctuary this morning, there is something you can share with another that ensures faithful discipleship. If you can operate a washing machine or fold a towel, sort clothing, share a meal, write a card, make a friendly visit or phone call, visit the sick and the shut-in. If you can sit and have a conversation, sing a song, read a poem, or even play a board game. If you can share your time with someone who desires or needs the company of another. If you can pray, if you can read scripture, tell a joke, or listen to a joke. There is an opportunity to demonstrate care without condition, without an expectation of a return other than the fulfillment of your call, our call to follow, our call to discipleship, our common call to care. The image of the disciples leaving their nets behind not only suggests the importance of a fisherman having a net to collect his catch. I am reminded of the need for a safety net and the provision of supportive services to help to catch those who may fall through the cracks while our government seeks to figure it out. The other day, one of our safe haven guests wanted to schedule a time to wash his clothing. He scheduled a convenient time, and I then asked if he would be willing to wash the towels for the shower program. Without hesitation and with utter delight, he said he would love to help. There are many in our midst waiting for an invitation to serve, just waiting for an invitation to serve. We have 11 new disciples. Someone's waiting for an invitation. Would you remind them of Mark's gospel and God's call to follow? Amen.